Welcome back to Demand Decoded. Thanks for tuning in today. And in this episode, I'm joined by Phil to talk about the paid ads ROI reality check and really assessing the true value of paid advertising. So in this episode, we're going to dive into why companies continue pouring money into a channel that frequently fails, quite frankly, to deliver positive results, and look at some of the metrics you can actually start tracking to about your paid ad spend and get more from the channel, or maybe ditch it altogether. So yeah, what were your initial thoughts on this topic, Phil?
Thanks, Dan. It's paid PPC, paid social. It's a divisive issue, and it intrigues me the degree to which B2B marketers are, overcommitted to it, given very often the results that they're seeing themselves. But I think it's a product of lots and lots of commentary online from very loud, convincing sources that sometimes clouds people's ability or judgment in terms of looking dispassionately at their own results sometimes. So I think it's really interesting to explore the topic. It's become a lot clearer for me over recent weeks, months, and years, thanks to the work you've been doing at Blend 2. So yeah, an interesting topic, and I think there's always something to learn. So why don't you start by telling us what you think the lay of the land is and why it's a huge problem now?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard it a lot, haven't we? When we had Chris on in the last episode, we kind of did a short piece on PPC and the huge waste that's there at the moment. And he's only one person talking about this right now. There is such a fundamental problem in marketing right now across all industries, across all businesses of all sizes, when it comes to paid advertising and the spend that's going into it and the return that is just so poor and sometimes non-existent that, like, I don't think we can, and other marketers can no longer hide the fact that this is a reality and something needs to be done about it, because it's quite serious. The waste that's going on is just not really acceptable anymore.
Why do you think spend is so high if return isn't there or isn't visible? What do you think drives that?
I know it is mad, right? It's like that drug to get those instant results. Like paid advertising, in particular paid search anyway, is one of those tangible things where you can, in theory, pay more to instantly get a qualified lead. Like, yeah, you pay more, you get more. In theory, that's the way it works. So it's almost as if marketers are tricked into thinking, oh, we're not getting as much, right, let's pay more. If we pay more, we'll get more. That mindset still exists.
Yeah, so ultimately kind of a unintended consequence of a conversation that's become increasingly about performance-based, measurable digital marketing tactics being desirable because of their measurability.
Yeah.
And that like obscures and obfuscates some other stuff. And I think it's definitely got worse over time. I've personally been skeptical about the power of paid, particularly PPC in B2B for a long, long time. But we know as well that over the years, the cost per click, the average cost per click in B2B has increased dramatically. 7-fold was the last thing I heard on the subject. And in addition, the measurable result, the revenue result, is reported to have declined significantly too. So those two things are going in opposite directions, making whatever the situation we're in worse in terms of ROI, in terms of the efficiency of the spend. But this, like you say, it's the performance and the measurability of it that I think gets in the way of sometimes, true analysis, I suppose, fact-based analysis of what paid is doing for a business.
Yeah,
within the marketing.
I do get it though. The idea of paid search is appealing, right? Let's say you're not performing as well as you'd like to organically in that space for those keywords for that industry term. in theory, you can just pay to be there instead.
Indeed, that's often cited as a key reason to use, in particular, Google PPC, right? And probably part of the argument for Bing as well. But you were just telling me about the kind of the performance that sort of thing gets, because there's a very big disparity, isn't there, between click-through rate on
what was that?
On organic versus paid
Yeah.
placement.
So WordStream study showed that the average click-through rate for the first and second organic results on Google are 28.5 and 15.7% respectively. But the average click-through rate for a paid search ad sits around 2%. So
Yeah,
I know where I'd rather be, but there are voices and people telling you it's like, oh, well, don't worry if you're not appearing on organic, because for the meantime, perhaps whilst you work on that, just pay to be there. But it's not the same.
Yeah, no, you get a very small gain in return for that spend in terms of click-through rate from search result page. So yeah, I mean, you can't be there organically overnight in most cases. I mean, sometimes you can do it that quickly, but it takes effort, takes time. But the argument that PPC is a good tactical stopgap, a way to do that, shortcut that, just doesn't hold water, does it? Because of that huge disparity in click-through rate.
Yeah, not in most cases, anyway.
You mentioned.
Sorry, go on.
Well, I was going to say, you mentioned that it's the measurability of it, it's the performance mindset of it that is one of the reasons for its popularity, and its sort of the amount of it that's done and the focus that's applied on it. But it's that measurability that's the problem, right? And the way that PPC is measured and assessed and validated that's part of the problem.
Yeah. You know what? It's funny, isn't it, actually? Because PPC, talking from a search perspective, is actually so easy to measure. It's one of the most easy things that you could possibly measure in marketing. Actually, maybe the easiest. Like, you can directly see, as long as you have, the software in place to see this, but you can directly see when somebody clicks on one of your paid search ads and then goes on to complete an action on your website. You can see that through software. Like, it is directly there. And yet we still have this huge problem with measurability when it comes to paid ads. Like, the actual true value of it is not being looked at.
Yeah. Okay, well, go double click on that, will you, for me? What measurements are the wrong measurements, and what would be the right measurements?
Yeah, well, a lot of people are still kind of wedded to the kind of in-platform metrics that you get within Google Ads itself, but also within their software attribution tools. So looking at things like impressions, clicks, click-through rates, leads generated through ads, all of these kind of vanity metrics that don't actually equate to anything meaningful from a business commercial standpoint, are kind of not that important when it comes to paid ads, to be honest. I would say, paid ads is one of those channels where you should solely be using it to generate high intent leads, pipeline, and revenue. So why is it people aren't looking at those things? Because they are the things that matter to marketing and the business. People are still so fixated on, how many impressions are we getting from paid search, how many clicks are we getting through. None of that really matters unless you're getting high intent leads, but that doesn't even matter unless they're generating pipeline, but that doesn't even matter unless that's generating revenue. So you really need to be looking at this holistically, the whole way through, from the point somebody clicks to the point that they become a closed won customer. That was a bit of a tangent there, but
yeah. I mean, there's no value in increasing any one measurable metric by a significant proportion if it isn't a metric that correlates with revenue, truth be told. And there's no value in looking at a very, very small part of the buyer's journey, if a look at the wider buyer's journey shows you that all the hard work, all the effort, all the money you've spent to drive that metric isn't correlated with, at least in terms of
Yeah.
revenue.
And some other things marketers say and do around paid search, as to kind of justify the cost, is using it as a kind of brand awareness play. Paid search does not work for brand awareness.
Right. Okay. You tell me more. Yeah.
The trouble is with paid search, you've got a tiny little logo. Okay, you can add an image extension if you really want to. You've got a title of a limited, character count. A couple of descriptions you can add in there, some extensions and things. That is not enough to give you a unique message, to generate brand affinity, to kind of have a buyer connect with your brand.
Yeah.
It is so hard to do through a paid search ad that is a few lines of text, a little favicon, and in most cases, actually, that's it, because a lot of people don't use the image extensions.
No, indeed.
Nobody is going to search for a keyword, see your ad, and remember you on paid search.
No,
unless
okay.
they've clicked.
Now I'm thinking about my own experiences here. I'm thinking about my own behaviors, and there are certainly occasions where I recognize names in paid ads, and those brands somehow have managed to occupy space in my brain. But it probably isn't the paid ads that create that, right? It's the other placements and the other more visual placements that are memorable placements that do connect with those spots in paid search, but they're not the source of brand awareness.
Exactly.
And we know as well that buyer behavior, the way buyers use search, is changing. Where search is leveraged in the buying process is moving. It's no longer at the discovery stage, the problem identification stage, meaning, and you'll no doubt back this up with some sort of more measurable information, but more often than not, they're actually going to search for your brand when they see your ad, meaning the brand awareness already exists, right?
Hang on, just clarify that.
So we were discussing before that there's this huge disparity in the performance of branded PPC versus all other keyword PPC. But of course, in order for a branded PPC campaign to be seen, your brand is already known and searched for.
Mm-hmm.
So brand awareness already exists and is not being created by it, because I think you said that there is reportedly a massive disparity between the efficacy of branded search, branded PPC ad campaigns versus all the other topics that a business might be bidding on.
Yeah, I think the stat that I saw or heard was branded campaigns generate around 80% of the revenue from Google Ads, yet only have about 20% of the budget. So 80% of the rest of the budget is going to other campaigns, but they're only generating 20% of the actual revenue from paid ads. So there is a huge difference there.
An important point you just made: PPC can generate revenue.
Yep, it can.
So what's our, and yet we're discussing some of the big challenges that result ultimately, we think, in the majority of cases, overspending on PPC, but it can generate revenue. So what's the headline, takeaway for people from our experience of PPC and our digging into it as a topic?
Yeah, I suppose just look at it honestly and measure the right things. If you're measuring the right things, you'll kind of come to the conclusion for yourself if it's working or not, and what components of it are working or not. You kind of you don't need to listen to anybody else really apart from yourself, as long as you're looking at the right things. But you need to do that in the first place to recognize if it's working or if it's not working, because in so many cases people aren't looking at the right metrics in terms of how much pipeline are we creating from paid search, how much revenue revenue are we creating from paid search? What's our return on ad spend? You know, what's our payback period on that ad spend? Yeah, people just aren't looking at that. So are almost, I suppose, as you said, they're just overspending on search, with like willy-nilly, just going at it and pumping more budget into a place that has no significant return on investment.
I think as well, I think it takes real courage, and Chris said it right on Demand Decoded last time, which is it shouldn't take courage, but it does take courage to go in the opposite direction to basically what the entire internet is telling you when you're a marketer, when you're searching for effective strategies and tactics to grow your business. You know, the resounding response is PPC is pretty wonderful. And I think that the degree to which that's the message we all hear is really makes us doubt. When we, even sometimes when we look at our results and we see that they are not good, it's not unusual for marketers to place the blame with themselves rather than the medium, the tactic, the platform, the channel. You know, and I think that's fair and understandable. We should always be self-critical and open to learning. But having tried it quite a few ways, quite a few times now, I am comfortable saying that actually it's not us all of the time. There are issues with the platforms, with the channels, and of course those issues are exacerbated by changing buyer behavior, and we'll probably get onto that in a bit more detail. But you know, ultimately, even things that work for a time can stop working when buyer behavior changes around them. But I think a lot of marketers are quick to blame themselves for failed PPC ROI. You don't see a lot of people talking about really, you don't see people deep diving into PPC in a B2B context that often. I tend to see more discussions about, can you share, you know, benchmark stats that I can compare my results to? You know, anyone got any tips for making PPC work harder, work better? How can I get better quality leads from PPC, et cetera, et cetera? You know, I see that conversation, particularly in communities, much more often than I see here. Look at the revenue generated from this type of campaign, that type of campaign, and so on.
Yeah, there's no talk around, here's a playbook on how to execute effectively time and time again. Because that doesn't exist, unfortunately.
No. And that's a very telling point. Actually, something that's worth mentioning is that we've said that PPC can drive revenue. It can. You know, and the key is to applying it smartly in the right places, in the right ways. And what that looks like will vary with the business, you know, and there are ranges. The main ranges are cost and complexity. You know, is your product or offering transactional, easy to buy, used how it comes off the shelf, so to speak, or is your offering complex, configurable, bespoke, you know, expensive, etc. That line is likely to be a line which I think influences what you can expect from PPC fundamentally, and how it might, or if it might work for you. You know, we've got clients that are using PPC in what I would say are very restrained and focused and targeted ways, and they're producing results, but it's not a given. And it doesn't necessarily apply for all businesses.
Yeah, I just want to go back to another point, which I thought of as well, around why businesses continue to use PPC, even you know, despite perhaps looking at the ROI to such a detailed level. If they are looking at pipeline and revenue, there might still be the calls of, well, so and so's still doing it. Competitors are still running ads. And there's almost this pressure to just do it because the competition are doing it. And like you say, it does take courage to just say, you know what, no, we don't need to do it. Like, here are our stats, you know, main takeaway from this again, like, do the analysis for yourself. And if the analysis proves that the ROI is poor, just, you know, that's your argument there and then. It doesn't matter who else is doing it. the ROI is the true story at the end of the day.
Yeah, there's, I think, defenders of the sort of use it no matter what sort of position could potentially have an argument to say, over the short term you might not see an impact, but over the long term you might, because there's correlation. It was reported recently. I'll have to find out what report it was and share it on after the event. But there was a report recently that, you know, there's correlation between high intent conversion, you know, lead generation and revenue, and people having been served with hundreds of ads in the interim. Now, it's only correlation. There's no proven link between those ads and the purchase at the end of the day, but nonetheless, it exists. And so you could say, it's a bit of a fear-based proposition, but you could say that actually turning off ads for a business that's been using them extensively and, you know, in a competitive market, you know, the unknown consequence of that is, will that over time decrease and degrade our ability to generate revenue? Now, I strongly believe it wouldn't. You know, I think that if you invest that energy and that money in things that are aligned to the preferred buyer behaviors of today, then you will grow your pipeline overall, and it will continue to grow. But I guess that's something that people have to, like you say, come to terms with, and find the courage to say, actually, no, I believe that this, you know, this lever and this lever, if pulled together, will outweigh anything I can generate via this lever. And, well, let's face it, any business that's been using PPC for a long time should have tons of data available to them to be able to say with some confidence it is or it isn't producing a result that's worth continuing to spend X for.
Yeah, the point you just made on PPC ads being seen that then go on to influence something else is a problem in itself, really. And it's a problem with, you know, the influenced attribution model in saying, oh, because somebody saw one of our ads, you know, 90 days ago, we're going to influence a whole load of revenue on that thing to kind of make it look like it's working, or, you know, with good intentions, perhaps, to say that this thing might be working. But the problem is with that, you're kind of then placing influence on a whole load of things, and they can't all be weighted the same, yet they are being weighted the same. And there is a fundamental issue with that.
Yeah, there's kind of like quantitative easing in attribution, right? Which is unlike the scenario that Rand talked about on his demand talk last year, which was billboard goes up on street corner, footfall in shop goes up, correlation and influence. It's like we assign the influence of each ad to many things, and of many things to each ad, and it, you know, we create this measure of influence, really, which is, well, if it was seen, if it was unseen, but we can prove it was there, it's partly responsible for a deal. But we don't divide that down by 10 times. We kind of multiply it up 10 times. Attribution's really, you know, challenging thing to do and get right, because it's so easy to over attribute, influence, and affect things that could have had none. And we never know. And that's the problem with it, right? You just don't know. None of the technology we have, none of the tracking capability we have has the ability to get inside here and say with any certainty what actually touched, was seen, was registered, and produced a desire. And self-reported attribution is really powerful, but even it has its limits, because you only get what the person is able to tell you. But, you know, we've seen that it's got real value and merits, and it's closer to the truth than a lot of attributed measurements. But, you know, nothing we can do can tell us, you know, exactly what brought a B2B buyer to the point of purchase.
Yeah, and I would say when it comes to paid search, actually using a more linear attribution model to say, this was the first time somebody has heard about us, then clicked on our ad, and then gone through to, you know, whatever conversion point, high intent conversion, is probably the best way to go. Because when you think about it, the main intention of a paid search ad is to capture demand that you probably haven't created in the first place. Because had you created that demand and built that connection and that affinity with the buyer, they probably wouldn't have then turned to Google and started searching for these solution type queries where a load of your competitors will be coming up too, that have probably come to you in the first place.
You're right about that, and I reckon that that's probably a good approach to use data to really dial in your investment and your strategy. But of course, it's on a very small percentage probably of your pipeline revenue, because as we just described, only 2% of clicks go to paid search on average. 80% of businesses that do PPC at scale, their search and their clicks and their revenues goes on branded search. So only 20% goes to those other campaigns where you can actually capture demand that you didn't create through paid. So it's a really small percentage. And I mean, again, when you look at pipeline and where it's all coming from, you should see clearly that that's the case. But you can use that information to fine tune your approach in your campaign, and hopefully to increase your ROI by dramatically reducing your spend, increasing the revenue that it generates, and freeing up investment for other things.
So now might be a good time to talk through our experience over the past kind of 12-18 months with PPC before we kind of move on to some of the buyer changes that might have happened to cause these things.
Sure.
So we've done a lot of experimenting, I would say, with paid search over the last 12-18 months, tried a lot of different campaigns out, Google and Microsoft, and learned a lot in the process, I would say. So firstly, I'd say the first learning was, when I joined Blend, we had a few campaigns running. We weren't spending a huge amount, but there was a branded campaign that most businesses run, to be fair. And I've kind of always run the hypothesis that you don't need a branded campaign on PPC for the most part. I think there are certain industries that are so competitive and businesses that are so competitive, like you're being swamped by good competitor ads perhaps, and you just have to pay to play in those places, or the ROI is just justified on those ads because perhaps you've got a large ACV or whatever, so it kind of makes up for it. But I think in most cases, if a buyer is searching for your brand, they just want your brand. They're kind of not bothered about any competitor ads. They want to gravitate straight to you. So kind of ran the hypothesis, turned it off, didn't have a declining impact on high intent leads or pipeline, so ran with it. It was a successful saver of budget.
Yeah. And I mean, just as the backstory to that, no resistance from my side to do that, because I've always treated it with, certainly for ourselves and for a lot of our clients, but for ourselves as a small, maybe medium-sized services business, I believe what you believe, which is if someone's searching for our brand, they're going to go to our organic result, and if they can be convinced to click on a competitor's ad on our brand name, then it's probably not going to go well, anyway. So there's very little motivation from my side to keep that sort of thing running. And I will say this repeatedly, but I'm glad we've done the tests. But I've always looked with a little bit of skepticism at the things that we've tested.
Yeah. And I would probably say, for 90% of businesses, I reckon they could turn off the brand search. I really do. And not have any negative impact on getting the click-through rate from search to their website, because they'll just pick it up organically.
Yeah. Yeah, and spend and if they run the ads, even if it's in response to competitors, they'll just increase the cost of the same traffic that they're getting.
Yeah, so I definitely urge people to try it out. Try it out for a month, and perhaps compare it to then Google Search Console keyword click-through rates, and you'll probably see that the branded keyword click-through goes up as you've turned your ad off. In fact, I'm almost pretty certain of that.
Yeah. So then what did you do?
So yeah, we had a couple of other campaigns running. Kind of just fine-tuned them in terms of just dialing in on the high intent keywords, right? It's kind of taking all the best practice information that's out there from the demand gen people like Chris Walker, other people like learnings from Cognism, stuff like that, and just dialing in on high intent keywords, kind of binning any middle of funnel like consideration stagey campaigns and dialing in on that. So we set that up from in terms of results, like, okay, we were getting a handful of like high intent leads that were occasionally converting into pipeline, but at a way less rate than anything organically. So we then went on to test even more campaigns. We started splitting it out by location and doing more kind of clever things within Google in like demographic targeting, location targeting. Just kind of trying to split things out in so many different ways in an attempt to make up for the poor performance that we were seeing. It's like, okay, we're obviously not being clever enough here. Like find that secret source that obviously exists within Google. It must be there. Surely we just need to tweak these settings or set our campaigns up in a different way in order to do this. And at the same time, probably mid last year, we changed our positioning to focus more on websites. So we then had to change up a few campaigns there and focus solely on websites, and still even going after a more tailored area, still results were the same. We had a few high intent leads continue to come in, some converted into pipeline, but none converted into revenue. Meanwhile, we were having a ton more organic leads come through that were converting. So we can talk about kind of the buyer mindset in a minute, but it's interesting to look at the difference between the mindset of a paid search buyer and an organic buyer. So we then tried out some new campaigns after changing our positioning, found the same results. So we thought, okay, right, we've heard some good things about Microsoft. Much lower CPCs, I mean much lower, but lower volume. But we could probably still invest the same amount as we were investing into Google and get similar
and a different audience as well. People sort of cite Bing and Microsoft as potentially being a more B2B or enterprise, or an audience that's less free to choose their search engine and browser.
Yeah, it's preloaded, right?
Yeah,
it's their preloaded browser, and perhaps they can't install Chrome or whatever on their computer and use Google, so they're kind of by default using Bing. I think people kind of associate that more with like enterprise businesses that might have more lockdown kind of security measures on their computers. But so tried Bing. Don't get me wrong, CPCs, cost per click, everything was incredible. If you look at the platform metrics themselves, clicks were through the roof, impressions were amazing, cost per click. I mean, we're talking, so from memory, without having the cost per click in front of me, Google cost per click on one of our website related keywords was about 25 to 30 quid. Whereas on Bing, you're talking anywhere between £2 and £5. The difference is that massive. So I thought we'd cracked it. Like after the first week or two of looking at the Microsoft ads results, I was like, this is incredible. Like we found the secret here. Let's ditch Google. We were off of Google by that point. No budget on Google anymore. It was all in Microsoft. But again, the same thing comes around. Waited out a couple of months. This time saw no high intent leads from Microsoft, despite spending a few thousand on there. No pipeline, no revenue.
I've got an interesting follow-up question to ask, which I think might lead to an interesting discussion. But yeah, like you say, ultimately the fruit that it bore were the same, non-existent. Some might say it was the landing page's fault. And I'm now thinking about our Plumber Bristol efforts and campaign.
Yeah.
Should we tell the listeners a little bit about the fact that we didn't ignore the landing pages? Far from it. We created special, dedicated, optimized landing pages for it. But I think I'm right in saying that they've worked better in organic than they have in paid.
It's funny, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, we jumped through every hoop, right? We tried to optimize these campaigns on so many levels, and we really did. When you look at the ad scores, they were between 7 and 10 out of 10 every time.
Yeah.
They were really well optimized ads, and the landing pages again were dedicated landing pages to those campaigns, and we had split those campaigns out a lot to come up with these highly tailored landing pages that in theory should work, because I was so determined that PPC should be working. There are in-market buyers searching high intent keywords that literally relate exactly to what we do. The opportunity was there to be had, surely. I was determined to get this to work, and yet still the same results occurred on Google, on Microsoft. Poor, really, really poor end product in terms of revenue from these channels.
Yeah. And I mean, let's remind ourselves and remind everybody this is not B2C. This is not e-commerce. This is not even transactional in terms of on the B2B scale of cost and complexity. This is B2B business we're talking about. We're not saying that landing page optimization, quality score, campaign optimization don't have their place in B2C, in e-commerce, etc. I think for the most part, it's the success of these tools, channels, tactics in those fields and areas that's washed over us in B2B, but it just doesn't correlate. It doesn't work out the same in our space, right?
Yeah. So basically, at the start of this year, we turned it off. We weren't prepared to invest any more this year into paid search. So have turned it off and seen a dramatic increase in high intent submissions ever since. So
let's clarify that though. Yes, we've seen the increase is not as a result of turning it off, right?
It's not.
The PPC wasn't decreasing our high intent lead generation, but by turning it off, we haven't made things worse. Other things we've done have made it better.
Yes.
And PPC isn't missed.
Yeah. So let me clarify. We turned it off, invested better in other areas.
Yeah, exactly.
Which led to an increase in high intent leads and pipeline.
Which we can, very easily say for ourselves is a better use of that money. Yeah. It's a better investment. It's a better return on that investment, which as a marketing manager, is ultimately your goal, your prerogative, your objective, to spend the money wisely.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was touched upon as well recently. That PPC, if you do or don't look at the revenue generation results, it's usually a bad use of money.
Yeah, a shocking use in most cases.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to touch on, the kind of whys. What is it about? We, the marketers, we're seeing the poor performance, but it's the buyers that are suffering all this PPC going on. I think we've covered a lot of it, but just think that beyond the very sort of lowest points on that scale of cost and complexity, you know, ads just don't feature on the buyer's journey, the consideration journey. They know that it's a manipulation of their time, of their attention, of their research process. If they give in to clicking on an ad, they're going somewhere where they didn't intend to go in the first place. They're basically succumbing to marketing, which is what they objectively don't want to do. They're savvy now. They're aware that marketers will at times spin them, an overly positive story, and an ad is a surefire way to get presented with that version of facts. I think. I don't. Again, we've seen the use of search change a little bit. It's being leveraged more in the later stages of the research and buying process. But I think more than anything, it's just that buyers are not incentivized or minded to click on an ad as part of the deliberation process for making a potentially expensive purchase that they'll be held accountable for in their organization, in terms of its outcomes. Add to that fact that a lot of these purchases happen over very, very long periods of time. I think a lot longer than most appreciate. And amongst, in some situations, quite large groups of buyers, ads just aren't a tool for them to make that decision effectively and safely together.
Yeah. And kind of, along the same lines as you, buyers know what ads are now, despite Google's best attempt to kind of disguise them to make them less like ads. And to be fair, they blend in quite well now, actually. But buyers still understand what an ad is and what you're trying to do with an ad, and the fact that that ad hasn't earned its place at the top of Google like the organic results have, and they don't carry the same authority and weight as the organic results. That's the kind of way I feel about it.
We're probably all going to have RSI later in life from doing that, like instantly on every search result page, right? Because you have to find out what's really there. I think even before you click an ad, you probably go and look at the organic results. So the old mouse wheels of today are getting a lot of action when it comes to Google Ads.
Indeed, yeah, or swiping on the thumb. If you're on the phone, I think we're all going to have severe arthritis in the near future, if not already.
So it's a real risk. It's a real risk.
Yeah. So we'll move on to paid social. Talk about that in a minute. But do you have any kind of last words of advice or just encouragement for marketers around paid search? Anything you want to say, really?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that we can advise and encourage people to do is trust their own numbers, have the courage to see poor performance for what it is, have the confidence to tread a different path, right? It's like this being trapped in this must use PPC no matter what mindset is really damaging, and it can work. Test it by all means. But when you do test it, act on the data you get back. Don't act on the opinions of others. Don't act on the voices and the blog posts of gurus and leaders. Act on your data. Act on your data, and seek people that are giving you balanced information and advice and stories. I suppose if you're working with somebody and they can only say good things about a channel or a tactic, they're not impartial, and therefore maybe they're not giving you good advice in an all-round way. So I recognize, and I have felt myself the kind of I suppose it's a kind of imposter syndrome, really, which is oh no, it's me and the way I'm using this thing that isn't getting the results. I want people to feel free from that perception if they've done the tests, got the data, and they've listened to balanced advice.
Yeah, nice. So now, of course, obviously, when it comes to paid advertising in B2B marketing anyway, there isn't just paid search. And actually, there are a whole lot of paid advertising channels out there. Don't get me wrong, there are a ton. But the main two, I think we can say that are used pretty universally are paid search and paid social. And on the paid social front, in particular, LinkedIn is obviously the primary platform for most B2B. So we just wanted to segue slightly into paid social and kind of do a similar thing, look at the ROI of it. Let's have a bit of a reality check into what we're truly measuring in terms of looking at the value of paid advertising when it comes to social.
Yeah.
Some of the main problems that I see at the moment when it comes to the way that paid social is being used and measured is it's almost used in the same way that paid search is being used to capture in-market buyers who are looking for a solution. But fundamentally, that is just not what somebody is doing on a social platform like LinkedIn. I don't open LinkedIn on my phone and think, right, so I need to buy an email marketing software. Let me scroll through LinkedIn, wait till I see an ad. And then click through to it. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah. There's only one thing appears in my mind when I think about paid social being used that way, and it's the little vomit emoji, because it's just it creates such a strong distaste in my mouth. And somebody a long time ago said, and I wish I could remember who this was, that B2B use of Facebook makes me sick in my mouth, was the quote. And I'm like, it's a little bit the same, because as you say, if you apply the PPC mindset to the paid social channel, you're wasting the potential that it has, and I think we would agree that for the most part, paid social's got more legs than PPC for the average B2B business. But again, if you're focusing on converting an in-market buyer or an out-of-market buyer, but ultimately focus it on creating a trackable event, a conversion, then you're fighting against the buyer's preferences when they're on that platform. You're fighting against the platform's preferences, and you're doing the same thing that's failing you in PPC, which is you're not aligning the way you market to the way buyers buy.
Yeah. And you just mentioned the words there, trackable event. And that's what it comes down to. That's the issue, that marketers are so desperate for a trackable event, for that, explicit attribution that you get through paid search. They want that through paid social too. So, you end up doing the things that are bad practice, but great in terms of measurability. So you can track these things, but they might not be working that well. That's the same thing with like LinkedIn lead gen ads. B2Bs love them because you're getting that kind of direct end result from it, which is a contact, a lead, a piece of somebody's information. However you want to look at it, that's what you're getting. But oftentimes, you're paying above the odds for this information. You're probably looking at like £50 upwards for an email address on LinkedIn, which is just, insane, really. When
given the close rate,
and given the intent of those being so low, it's probably, they're exchanging their information for a piece of collateral and content in most cases, sometimes a demo, but again, they're going to convert at a pretty poor rate. So paid social, just being kind of used in the same vein as paid search, unfortunately.
I mean, that can be the product of things that are for some out of their control, right? Organizations sometimes set KPIs based on needs of either a hungry sales team that need leads to be able to convert those at 2% or something, and it can be a trickle down problem that results in this particular challenge, I think, which is using paid social, using LinkedIn as a lead gen channel. And it can be a bit of an uphill battle, can't it, to change minds and win hearts, especially when you consider how hard it is to measure the proper, well, maybe not proper, the more effective use of paid social.
It can be because paid social can be hard to measure, but those KPIs are seriously important and they do need to change in order to do paid social effectively, because doing paid social effectively oftentimes means you won't be measuring those same things in terms of like leads and MQLs. You're not going to have that direct measurement that you have from a LinkedIn lead gen ad or a direct click to a landing page and then convert, for example. You're kind of going to have to go off of either in-platform indicative metrics or conversion tracking within LinkedIn, and you're not going to have the same visibility at all as you do when it comes to those lead gen ads or conversions on direct conversions from a click to a form.
No, and if you use paid social to create affinity, to create demand, you're going to be looking for the impact in or near your pipeline, right? High intent demo requests, high intent conversions, opportunities, revenue, and so on. But they can't be directly connected. What can people do to establish for themselves that it is working versus it isn't working?
Yeah, well, firstly, we kind of missed off the point in terms of what you should be doing in terms of paid social. And this isn't necessarily an episode for paid social necessarily, but firstly, if you are using paid advertising on social media as a way to generate instant leads and instant buyers for your business, you're fundamentally using the platform wrong, because that's not what a buyer is there to do. They're there to kind of consume information. So the right thing to do, therefore, is to serve them with that useful information.
Just on that point, if you're using it in that way, you can measure the wrongness, which is quite handy, because you'll be able to measure the poor close rate on those leads generated via that platform.
Yes.
So that's useful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of, a similar thing to paid search, right? If you are using it in those ways, if you're capturing direct leads through paid social platform or through a landing page from a paid social ad, go ahead.
You can measure how bad it is.
Do the analysis, look at the conversion rate from lead to MQL to pipeline to revenue. You'll see that it's probably quite poor in comparison to other channels that you have running. So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, there's your first point. Do the analysis. But yeah, where was I? Where you're
serving the content, serving the buyer preference.
Yes, so that's how paid social should be used, right? You're serving that content within the platform because a buyer, a user of that social media platform wants to stay on that platform. The social channel themselves want somebody to stay on that platform. So actually, just serving that content within the feed is way more beneficial, so they can consume your content, carry on scrolling. They can do everything they need to do within that one place. People don't want to click away from that platform if they're happy consuming content within there. So yeah, just bear that in mind before we then go on to measurability. But obviously, when you're changing from that direct attribution from like a lead-based social strategy to a kind of more content distribution, brand awareness type strategy, the measurement changes. It gets a lot harder in terms of measurement, but there are a few things you can do to get around this. So first of all, on LinkedIn, set up proper conversion tracking. Again, it's not going to be perfect. It's not always perfect, but it's pretty damn good and can give you a good idea as to whether or not somebody has seen one of your cold ads 90 days ago, 180 days ago, and has then gone on to complete your high intent form. You can see that. That is possible through LinkedIn. What you can't see is exactly who that person was.
Yeah, right.
So there is a drawback there. You can see how many conversions you got, but you can't see exactly who it was necessarily. Not
Right, so you
until
can't track it through to revenue or anything like that in an individual way.
not in all cases. No.
Yeah.
Not in all cases. But yeah, you've got self-reported attribution again, which is great. If somebody fills out your self-reported attribution field and says they heard about you through LinkedIn, okay, you've got a pretty good idea that your LinkedIn efforts are working, especially if you have just invested more heavily in that area in creating more in-feed content. Seeing a lift from self-reported attribution in terms of saying, I heard about you through LinkedIn ads or whatever ads you're running. Okay, that's good indication. But again, still not direct attribution from they saw this exact ad with this creative. They went on to click this and do this. Like you unfortunately, by running LinkedIn ads in the most optimal way, you actually lose that level of measurability.
Yeah.
You kind of just have to be okay with it.
You've given me a thought about measurability in general, which is, even self-reported attribution, comes in line for some valid criticism, I think, because it's got limits. But no report, no measurability, as we've described, can actually get inside and read the mind of the person that filled in the form or bought the product, right? So we're never going to get to that level of clarity. But it's the trend in reports that I think is always so more interesting than the snapshot number. It's like, okay, so you get 10 people a month saying it was LinkedIn that was the source of their intent. But the direction of travel of that over time, in line with your investments, in line with your spend, in line with your activity, that is much more telling, I think. And that's the way that you can start to ascertain and feel. And marketers need to feel their way sometimes through effective marketing, but building out the reports that show you the trend in self-reported attribution sources is a really good way, I think, to help build a picture of what's impacting your results in one way or another.
Yeah. And would you agree in that sometimes, especially when it comes to things in marketing that are harder to measure, there is an element of gut feel in there and just other conversations with people that help. So, for example, like if Sean has a sales call with somebody and they say, oh, I've seen you all over LinkedIn and I kind of, I had to reach out or whatever. It's like, okay, well, we didn't know that information from anywhere else, perhaps self-reported attribution, but the emphasis, if somebody has put emphasis on that during a conversation, it might carry more weight. And, you need to use all of these signals in order to make the right decision and invest in the right areas and not rely on direct attribution that you don't really have.
Yeah, that's a sensible recommendation. It's team sport, isn't it? Growing a business, and I think you've got to aggregate insights, and that's probably the best name for them because that's as good as it can ever be. And sometimes your self-reported attribution will give you false positives, right? Some people will just type in something to get on with their day, and I've always been of the viewpoint that that's something that we should be fine with and we should accept. I've always resisted the urge to take, for example, all of a business's MQLs and reject the poor quality ones, because I'm like, MQL, in my opinion. We've got conversion rates and we've got trends. Let's not manipulate them and like polish them. Let's just use them as they are. So I think gathering those insights and anecdotes, worth putting that sort of information in your CRM, and meeting and talking, and like you say, listening to other viewpoints, perspectives, and narratives on what is effective marketing. And the thing that's really interesting to me is that marketing is still, the communication of a proposition from one party to another through a creative medium, and none of the performance-based measurability that we've got comes anywhere close to understanding the effect of the creative. And so feeling has got to be a huge part of it.
Absolutely. All right. I think that's probably a pretty good place to end, unless you've got anything else to add.
No. Again, same takeaway. Applies. Look carefully at your data. Paid social's probably got a bit more going for it for the majority of us. If used well, used wisely. Think of your buyer. Ultimately, put your buyer at the center of your activity and your intentions, and you've got a good chance of getting them to, come to your door, I suppose. So yeah, that's the headline from me. What about you?
Yeah, I'd kind of just agree with all of that, and start measuring the right things, take an honest view, measure if you can, and if you can't, collate the sources from other places.
Yeah, good point. Nice one.
All right, cool. Let's wrap it up there. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Demand Decoded. Of course, you can catch all other episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Just search for Demand Decoded and you'll find it there. So yeah, until next time, we'll catch you later. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
See you later. Bye.